Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, where we've got some of Chad and I's favorite thing to do is talk about polling. Who doesn't like to talk about polling if you're in the business, I guess, of talking about politics? It's always a fun time. And, you know, all the usual caveats apply. Any one poll can be wrong. Polls released by campaigns should be taken with a grain of salt. All of those things. But we do have some polling in the Miller-Armstrong race that I just published shortly before we began recording this podcast. And it shows Kelly Armstrong with a 41-point lead in that race. And it doesn't surprise me that Armstrong would be winning. I guess the margin that the poll shows surprises me. Anyway, we're going to talk about all that. Also joining us is a guest, Pat Finken, a longtime political consultant in North Dakota, most recently with the Brighter Future Fund, who is not making friends with some quarters of North Dakota politics right now with mailers sent out about U.S. House candidate Rick Becker. Pat, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, and thanks for having me. I'm glad to join you.
I actually have one of your mailers right here that arrived in my mailbox yesterday.
I just got one yesterday too, Pat.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So
that's what they're for. They don't do any good if they don't end up in a mailbox. So.
Amen.
So this mailer about Becker suggests that he is enabling illegal immigration and more crime, that he was against Trump's border wall, he was for defunding law enforcement, and for defunding the North Dakota National Guard. And I just want to, I think the vote on the border wall thing is pretty straightforward. I mean, that was a resolution basically saying, build the wall. Becker and a couple other Republicans, people I perceive as pretty centrist Republicans, Thomas Beadle, who was he's currently the treasurer, but he was in the legislature at the time. He voted against it. And by the way, this was a 2019 vote. It was HCR 3025, if somebody wants to look it up. Representative Shannon Ross-Jones from Fargo voted against it. And then mostly it was Democrats who also voted against it. That one's pretty straightforward. But when I've heard Becker respond to some of the other claims made in the mailers, you know, that he voted against some of these budgets for, you know, the Highway Patrol or the National Guard, I mean, his argument is if you don't like the amount of spending that's in the budget, voting against it is not necessarily saying, I don't want to fund the National Guard. He's just saying, I didn't want to fund it at that level. I think that's his defense. How do you respond to that, Pat?
Well, I'm happy to respond to all this because, of course, let's be honest, he's deploying the standard, I need my voting record coming back to haunt me, political strategy. You know, this is what all politicians do when they've got votes that are uncomfortable for them. They, first of all, create a bogeyman. And in this case, it's me, right? They're going to play the victim. Oh, I'm being attacked unfairly. And then, of course, they're going to call everything you talk about a lie. But to your point specifically, voted against it. But it tells us two things about it. One is that he didn't come back with an alternative. And in the absence of an alternative, what were you really voting against? If you say it was too big and you don't have an alternative, it really is about voting against that bill. And when you vote against the funding bill, you are in effect want to defund that. Now he's saying, well, it should have gone back to committee and come back. Well, it didn't play out that. And that's the other thing we have to be concerned about. Rick Becker is famous for voting no. He likes to vote no and then run to social media and thump his chest about how great I refer to him as a show pony. I think I did that with you in a radio interview one time. The reality is that voting no is not getting something done. It is, in the case of these funding measures, absolutely, you can look at any one of them and say, oh, that one was too big. But there's a pattern here. He voted against the AG's budget repeatedly. That AG budget is about more than law enforcement, but its central job is law enforcement. He also, that's where the funds come to sue the federal government on overreach. So, but it's, again, there's a pattern. You talk about, with one bill. No, it wasn't one bill. It's a pattern in his time in the legislature, which tells us something. While he may not like what it tells us something about Representative Becker, or who wants to be a U.S. representative. He voted against the Highway Patrol. He voted against the National Guard. And, he takes exception to my use of the word defund, but guess what? In a recent radio interview, in fact, it was a debate, he actually used the term defund the exact same way I use it. He talked about defunding the Justice Department, the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, down the list of federal law enforcement. He's going to defund that this very same way that I talk about this. If you don't vote to support funding for these organizations, what is it if it's not supporting defunding? So yeah, he can come back now and say, it was a misunderstanding. It was meant to go back. Yet when you look at the record, he didn't go back and try to do it. He just voted no and walked away.
So Pat, I think I get frustrated with these budget bills as well, that people like Becker vote no, and then they brag and say everybody else is a big spender. And it's sort of to your point, a sort of a show pony sort of vote. But aren't you ultimately what you're saying here is that he is not a serious legislator? It's mostly, and I think the last thing we need in Congress right now is somebody else who's not serious about actually doing the job. Isn't that ultimately what we're saying? He's playing games with these things, not taking the job seriously, not making sure that we do have proper funding levels for these agencies. Is that sort of part of the message here?
Well, that is my concern. And quite frankly, it's why we're injected into this race, is because we have one representative in the U.S. House. We have to have somebody that's there to get some things done. And you're absolutely correct. It really is. He is not a serious look. He's not, he wants to play the tortured opposition. And we've seen how that has played out in the U.S. House over and over and over again, right? And finally, the adults showed up. That's what I love about what's going on in the U.S. House right now. The adults have shown up. And of course, we had, he wants to join that cabal of conservative legislators who also, like him, vote against everything, trying to have their way. And finally, the adults put them in their place, right? Both on spending bills, on aid to Ukraine and Israel, on Speaker Johnson. Yet, is that the person we want representing us in the U.S. House, to be part of that group? And, when you're from California, you're one of, 45 others? So California could, afford to have one that is actually, a show pony, stands up, does the same thing that Representative Becker does. But guess what? We got one. And we got the Farm Bill coming up, and we've got, balanced budgets and all those things that we have to deal with. And you need somebody that's going to go in there and not just have the right attitude, but also can work with people to get things done. The biggest, to your point, is if he was a serious legislator, he would have worked to get changes made to the bills that he opposes to. Instead, he just votes no's and then grandstands on it, like you pointed out. But before we move off the original point, and we can come back to this if you guys have more questions on this, but I want to read the border wall resolution that he voted against, because I think that's telling, and of course, voting records are a pesky little thing, especially when they aren't popular right now, the positions you took. But in the case of North Dakota Representative Rick Becker, he had one chance to stand tall with the president and in support of strong borders, strong national defense, and he voted no. And let me read this to you, because it's more than just the wall, right? A concurrent resolution urging Congress and the president to fund construction of a wall and border control impediments, along with the strengthening of border control infrastructure, and urging Congress and the president to ensure compliance with and enforcement of federal immigration laws. That's what he voted against. And of course, he says that was a protest vote. And of course, if you look at the footage of the vote, he just voted no. Didn't say boo. We couldn't find anything in social media where he protested. It's just now that it's inconvenient that he took that vote as all this, it was a protest.
Well, how is it? I mean, I don't understand. Protest vote. What was he protesting? Supposedly, I guess.
Well, he says it was some vote that the House had taken 2 weeks earlier that he was protesting by voting this way. Well, if he was protesting, it was just to himself in his head, right? My point being is that it isn't even about those issues. It's about the pattern that we see and how out of touch he is with what really matters to people here. And he's working very hard right now to recreate himself on a variety of fronts. I mean, he starts every speech with, "Oh, I'm big on the wall, big on pro-life, all that," right? Well, that's not what the voting record says. And the voting record, even though it's inconvenient, I guess a lot of people say there are going to be a lot of things, but what matters is what have you done? And if you look at what he's done, there's a whole. When it comes to law and order, it's quite troubling.
The interesting thing, because that is how I perceive Becker, is that he started out when he first came into the legislature, and I remember admiring him. He was a very thoughtful, sort of civil libertarian. That was very much that's where I'm at on a lot of these issues, and I appreciated a lot of the work there. It seems like he's repudiated much of that and has tried, for reasons I can only ascribe to opportunism, has embraced this new populism, and even for voters who also embrace it. Now, obviously, I do not. Not a fan of sort of Trump or MAGA style populism, but I mean, if we're evaluating a candidate, I mean, it's hard to look at Rick Becker and say, "Oh, this is where he's always been." And I also like to leave room for people to change their minds. I want people to change their minds and agree with me. I mean, people should be allowed to change their minds. There's a feeling that Becker is trying to portray himself as somebody he's not. And I mean, some of these votes, I think show that, but also show a lack of seriousness, where I think your point is really well made when you're saying that if you're gonna vote against something, and by the way, some of these votes we're constitutionally obligated to do. Like, we have to fund some of these things. That's not an option for the legislature. So if you're going to vote against them, then in my mind, you better have something where you went to bat and said, no, like, this is too much. Instead, we should do this, and we should allocate this way, and this should not be in the budget. Where was your alternative budget? And if you didn't put one up, then you're just trying to get Facebook likes.
Right. Well, I think Chad nailed it. He said he said not a serious legislator. At the very least, it's a very lazy legislator, right? And that's common to this, this obstructionist mentality that's going on a little bit in North Dakota and a little bit in Washington. But the majority are still people that want you to go there, work with others, and get things done. And even when asked, Rick Becker has a hard time saying he'll work with people, even though he knows that's what he's going to have to do to get things done. But he has no track record of that in the legislature.
Well, he's endorsed by Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, who is Matt Gaetz working with in Washington? I mean, Republicans don't even want to work with him. I mean, he's an outcast even within the Republican caucus.
Well, and that's a lot of it's striking that Becker's support largely is coming from that group nationally and not inside the state of North Dakota. Because, again, there are people here that are genuinely concerned about getting some things done, things we have to get done in this country. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you can't judge him by the voting record, then judge him by the company he keeps.
So, Pat, sort of observing this race from the outside, I mean, it's very clear, it's very tight between Becker and Fedorchak. It feels like, for example, there's a debate this weekend on Beck that Julie's not a part of, but the other four candidates are. I think right now Becker and Mund are on Heitkamp's show talking about the race. Are you at all concerned, like all four candidates are going to go after Julie, and what comes out of that on the other side? I mean, could we have a situation where Becker and Julie beat the crap out of each other and somebody comes in from on the back end?
No, I don't see that happening. I mean, I don't see Mund being successful, and I noticed that after she got into the race that Moore out of Williston got real quiet because that was a plant by the Becker crowd to try and steal some of the women vote away from Julie. So I don't see that. But I know, of course, I can't, as part of the
Right.
fact that I'm a 501c4, I can't work directly with candidates. But in the case of the Beck debate, nobody's talking about the fact that this is the weekend that the Fedorchaks have their son's graduation party, and they've got family here, right? So I mean, I wish somebody would ask her why she's not there, because it's a pretty darn good answer.
I mean, it is.
So the real problem here is that at the end of the day, if Julie Fedorchak doesn't win, it's going to be not because of Rick Becker. It's going to be because of what? She's the wild factor here that, she can't win, but she darn well could cost Julie the race. And then we end up with my favorite show pony in that slot.
We have, I actually have a print column that I've already written and filed that'll be published online on Saturday. I think it'll be in print on Monday. Basically saying that, if Cara Mund believes what she says about wanting more centrist Republican leadership, wanting, she's a moderate, she portrays herself as a moderate Republican, then she ought to drop out, because she can't win this race. But she can cause Rick Becker to win by eating into Julie Fedorchak's vote total. So, I mean, I'm thinking of the moderate Republicans and even the Democrats and everything that are supporting Mund. If you want to put Rick Becker in the House, that's the only thing you can achieve in this. That's my take on the race.
Yeah, and that's my greatest fear, is that that's exactly. I really believe that this would be a walk away for Julie if it wasn't for the fact that you have this, other candidate, Cara Mund, in there, and whether she gets her 5 or 10% or whatever that number is, that all comes right off of Julie's vote total, and that could very well make the difference in this race.
So I disagree a little bit with that coming straight from Julie, because I think some of Cara's support will be Democrats that are only crossing over to vote for Cara and wouldn't have otherwise crossed over, and certainly wouldn't have crossed over to vote for Julie. But so how does this play out? I mean, I had somebody tell me the other day, the only thing standing between this nomination and Julie is Julie raising enough money. Like, if she builds up her name ID, because, I mean, I think we've all seen polls, Becker's generally underwater, Julie is generally very favorable, but not maybe known as well. I mean, is that your take as well, that if she gets the money, that she wins this thing?
Well, I can't say that it guarantees it. And again, like I pointed out before, I'm not closely connected, but
understood. No, you can't talk.
My read of this is, if she can build her name ID, because one of the things we found in our early polling, back before even the convention, one of the things we found is that she translates, if you talk about name ID and awareness, she translates that into votes, but her name ID is not as strong as his. The other thing with Becker is that about half the people that said they're going to vote for him aren't sure they're going to vote for him. It's a very soft vote. So this is very winnable, but Julie has to, raise the money she's going to need to make herself aware, create awareness of her and what she stands for with the voters. And that's what's got to happen between now and the election. So you're absolutely right. Without that, she can't translate all the positives that she brings to the race.
Let's switch. And by the way, I agree with that. I think Julie's, and at this point, she better have the money she needs, because she needs to be spending it now. She's got to execute. And I think if she executes and she raises her name ID, I think she wins, whether Mund gets out or not. And then, by the way, that's just me saying she should get out. She's given no indication that she's getting out at all.
Before we translate to a different topic, which I took your transition to do, I just think it's important in terms of trying to help people understand who the real Rick Becker is, because that's what we're talking about here. This creation that he's trying to sell, whether it's through his TV ads or the recreation or the hiding from his voting record. But the voting record is something that matters, because it tells us who he really is, because it's what he's done in the past. Let me just touch on a couple more, and then we can change topics. He voted no against a bill that would have made it a crime for knowingly supplying a firearm or dangerous weapon or destructive device for use in a riot. You look at what's going on around our country right now. You don't think law enforcement needs that here? He also voted against a bill that what is called the revenge porn bill, which is making it a crime to distribute graphic or intimate knowledge or images of someone without consent. He voted no on that. He also voted on another bill. This is the more libertarian, law and order, be damned kind of approach that is probably more true to the real Rick Becker than what we're seeing today. He voted no on making it a crime, criminalizing indecent exposure towards minors and sexual performances by children, and to provide a penalty. These are the kinds of things he's voted against. I mean, we could talk about his flip-flop on abortion. And again, this is the past. Let's talk about the future. Immigration is going to be a big deal. We've already talked at length about that. But the farm bill is a big deal. I think you both would agree for North Dakota, the farm bill is a big deal. And he's already on record as saying that he opposes federal crop insurance. And he's our one voice in Congress. Is that really who we want representing North Dakota? Not and all the other stuff aside, the whole Freedom Caucus and being the kind of the bull in the china shop, all that aside, on the things that matter to North Dakota, doesn't that matter? So I'm done now. I'll get off my soapbox.
All right. Well, I did want to ask you about the polling that came out in the gubernatorial race, where, and just for people, I have an article up about this. People can certainly go look at that. But it's showing Armstrong leading Miller 60% to 19%, with 19% undecided. And that remains consistent across some of the demographics that the polling memo referenced. Voters aged over 65, Armstrong leads 61 to 19. Among self-described conservative voters, Armstrong leads 62 to 19. And among voters who say they have an established opinion of both the candidates, Armstrong leads 64-24. Pat, does that polling ring true to you?
I guess it's a little more than I would have expected, but I'm not surprised by, roughly where it lands. I know the pollster that did that poll, and it's a pretty reputable pollster. It's not, there are pollsters you can go out and find these days that'll give you the findings that you want. But I don't have any basis of comparison. I don't know if either of you guys have other polls you can refer to. How was that, Chad? Did I slide that in there nicely on you?
But I think anything that I want to talk about publicly would happen next week, Pat.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
But no, I think it makes sense. Let's be honest. Again, name ID matters, and Kelly's going to have a lot more name ID. He has been on the right side of most of the issues that people care about. He's a trusted player, right? And plus he counts with the energy industry, which is big to our economy. Tammy Miller is despite the attachment to Doug Burgum, is a relatively newcomer, and quite frankly, she's not Doug Burgum. I mean, Doug Burgum turned out to be a force of nature. I'm not sure that she plays in that. You think about, and the other thing is that I know that Dawson referred back in your article to a similar situation with the first race that Doug ran, and he was down at one point like 40%. The difference is that that Kelly is no Wayne Stedham. I mean, Kelly is willing and able. Strappy is a good word for him to fight back, but also will have the resources to match anything that Miller can put forward. So it's a whole different universe when you look at that. But I guess I'm not surprised. But I also know we're a long time till the election, right?
Yeah. So I think the other thing that people don't talk about enough with the Doug Burgum race in 2016 is the fact that Doug Burgum was a rock star before he got into politics. I mean, he has a portrait hanging in the Great Hall at the Capitol because he was such a known commodity. It's a different sort of ball game. And I also think that Kelly is so transparent, so accessible. People know him, that I just think it's a harder thing to sort of define. Me looking at those numbers, Kelly took some crap for being the first person to come out with a negative ad, but it seems to me that was a really effective strategy. Again, a month out, but to get that sort of first punch in before Tammy really defined herself. I mean, Pat, what do you think about that strategy that he used? And, people are sort of cringy, but I think it's the right move.
Well, I mean, we did it. As you two know, I ran Kevin Kramer's election in 2018 against Heidi Eidkamp. And we came out with, because we needed to in that case make sure that people knew the real candidate. And in this case, I think you're right. I mean, I agree. You got to get in there before somebody defines themselves. And Kelly doesn't suffer that because, of course, he's already been well defined and no in the process. So I guess I'm not overly surprised, maybe by the size of the margin, perhaps, but not that he would be in that position.
So if you were going to be if you were going to give the Miller campaign advice on what to do in the closing weeks, what would it be? Because my perception is that this poll, if maybe, again, the margin is bigger than I expected, but I, like you, not surprised that Armstrong's winning. I guess, where do they go from here? What do they do in the final weeks to try to close that gap?
Well, I don't know that this is advice. I think you're seeing play out exactly what they're going to do, and that is this new ad that's been released is wicked. And they're going to go down that path. But like you said, Chad, she's not Doug Burgum. He was a rock star. He was immersed in Republican politics, well known, sought after. And Rob, you made an interesting point in your column. This isn't 2016. 2016, the state was facing an oil revenue shortage. The state was a hot mess. I mean, that message played out really well at that time. I'm still wearing the bruises from that election. But the bottom line is that that's not where we are today. The attention's all on the national issues, and North Dakota's doing pretty well.
And also, Miller's not the outsider. She's an avatar, really, for the Burgum administration, and they've been in charge the last 8 years.
Exactly, and yet she's not. It's kind of like talking about vice presidents. They don't normally get you a lot of votes, and you're not the one who gets the credit for whatever the administration does. And so anyway, you asked me the question. I think we're going to see that play out, and this is their game plan going in, because at this point, in campaigns, you always have to ask yourself: are we going to do more damage and good by going to some kind of extreme level of attack? It's too late for that question, right? I think you've got to do something really shocking in order to have any chance at all. And even then, you run the risk of doing more damage than good.
Pat, the group you lead was involved in legislative primaries 2 years ago. Obviously, this primary is really, really important for the governor's race, for the congressional race, but very much so at the district level. When you talk about District 6 and 14 and in so many districts around this, District 30 here in Bismarck, is your group playing in any of those legislative primaries?
Well, while I never talk about things that I might do in the future, only what's publicly known, but thanks for asking.
Yeah.
To answer your question is, we are wholly focused on the...
Well, we may have lost Pat there for just a moment. He froze up. Pat, or do we have you back? I think you froze up for just a moment.
Oh, okay. It must have been someone...
You said solely focused, and then you froze up.
Yeah, we've been solely focused on the U.S. House race because that race is of utmost importance. And Chad, you said something that I think we really have to focus on. And this is no offense to the Democrats that are running, but the truth is the primary is the election this year. U.S. House, governor, and a lot of legislative districts. And I've been saying this, and this really is the other thing that we're focused on at Brighter Future Alliance, is reminding people to vote in the primary. The worst thing that could happen, and how people like some of the people we opposed in the legislature 2 years ago win, is because people don't show up. It's how Jeff Halverson in Minot wins with 600 votes out of the, 17,000 voters in that district. I mean, this is how these fringe minorities, kind of as I like to say, the crazies win, because nobody else shows up. And so it's vitally important for people to understand that the primary matters this year more than ever, and to vote in the primary. And then your voice will be heard. If you wait till the general, it could already be over.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the lack of competitiveness between the parties, and frankly, I mean, I hear from a lot of Republicans that wish that we could get back to more competitive general elections. Frankly, I think it would be good for the North Dakota Republican Party. They had to work for it a little bit more. But this is the environment that we're living in right now. And that makes, to your point, that makes the primary election, I don't want to say it was unimportant in the past, but certainly more important than it has been. Pat, I really appreciate you coming on, as always.
Hey, no, glad to do it. Anytime, guys.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault Podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Pat Finken, who, is not making a lot of friends dropping these flyers. I do wonder about the effectiveness of the flyers. I know like last cycle, we saw so many dropped in some of those legislative races, and it wasn't really Finken that did them. It was more Burgum's operation. You know, I think Finken was probably more strategic, but just the sheer volume of it makes me wonder if the mailer as a medium hasn't been burned out a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know, but you also have like the burning, the text messages are now a thing, and emails. It feels like so much is being burnt out. I think people get more annoyed by the text messages than they do of the mailers, and maybe not. I mean, I've received one, and so I don't think I'm on many targeted universes for the GOP primary, but I don't know. It just feels like in this race, there is not all that much information out there. I mean, you just wrote a column about how sort of quiet it is. And that's different than the people who are getting 30 mail pieces 2 years ago from Doug Burgum. So I do think it's a little bit different that people might be paying attention to this stuff. But like, how many mail pieces have you received?
I would say, well, probably about 8 or 9, I think, all told.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, but that's over the last month and a half. So, yeah. I mean, not that many. I mean, what is that? Maybe one a week or so.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I haven't really kept track that closely.
Yeah.
But
it just doesn't seem the same amount of, you're not seeing like the pictures of people saying, look at these 4 mailings I got today.
Right.
It just feels a little bit
spilling out of the mailbox. Yeah. I mean, that was excessive.
And I think these are all really fair hits on Becker. I mean, you can't just vote against everything and then brag about how, I mean, you have the Conservative Union and other people who give you good scores because you voted against these budgets. And
boy, is he obsessed about those scores too.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Those are really, really important to him. And the one thing, his rebuttal, sort of taken on its own, is not a bad rebuttal, where he says, listen, just because you vote against a budget doesn't mean you're against the National Guard. Taken at face value, that's true. What it needs is some additional context to say, well, what was your alternative? Because if we all agree that we need a national budget, a National Guard, what was your alternative budget for the National Guard? What was your alternative budget for the North Dakota Highway Patrol? And if all you did was just dunk on the people who voted for it, I feel like that you're just dunking on the people who put in the hard work and got to something that they could live with in these budgets.
Well, yeah, and I think Pat said it right. I mean, you want to fix the stuff on the front end, and try to get an alternative out there. But Becker never built relationships with the majority of either one of the chambers, right? Because if you're not with Rick Becker 100% of the time, you're wrong. Or you're evil, or you're whatever the adjective is. So, I mean, that's one of the problems. I mean, DC and a member of Congress, it's a business of wheeling and dealing and relationships. I think it's one of the things that's made Kelly successful. He does have good relationships. I mean, he talks about that he, on one hand, has a good relationship with everybody in his caucus, but he's also worked with Hakeem Jeffries on criminal justice reform and those kind of things. Pat, the biggest thing that I think Pat really articulated well, the voting record and all that kind of stuff. We need a member of Congress who's going to go there and be a serious legislator to get a FAR bill done.
Yeah.
Right? The FAR bill is not easy to get done. we don't have that much political power in this part of the country. And you need everybody involved.
And by definition, I mean, the Farm Bill is famously the result of a compromise between rural lawmakers, who these days are almost entirely Republicans, and urban lawmakers, who these days are almost entirely Democrats. And we could talk about why that is and why that's not a good thing for our country, but it is. It exists. And I mean, listen, if I want, as North Dakota's only member of the House of Representatives, I want somebody who's not going to say you either agree with me, who's not going to say you either agree with me 100% of the time, or you're a chicken, or you're a liar, or however Becker characterizes it. I want somebody who can go to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and if she can be won over on a vote that's important for North Dakota, then I want somebody who can go over and win her over, potentially. Right. And I mean, Kelly talks famously about how he, one of his first days in Congress, he ended up on a bus next to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and they got along great, and they exchanged, they learned some about each other's districts, and they had some jokes, and I mean, there's a rapport there, and I'm not saying that they have to agree with each other or that they have to like each other. I just want if somebody like AOC or Illinois, I don't care who it is, if you can get a vote for North Dakota on a specific bill, I want somebody who can go get that vote.
And Rob, you're right. If you want federal crop insurance in North Dakota, you're going to need some urban liberal Democrats in order to get that done with the food stamps program. Again, I think your point that maybe that's not the best way to get it, but it's the way that it's gotten done, right? I mean, right. Combining these things to get it done. So,
well, I mean, I would like to see urban areas elect more Republicans, and I would like to see rural areas maybe elect some more Democrats, so that we have more people from both parties in there who have a mix of these different parts of our country that represent them, and I think that would be healthier for our nation.
So I take a little bit of I disagree a little bit with your guys' take that Caramond potentially causes Julie to lose this thing, because I'm not 100% convinced that Caramond voters are Julie voters if she's not in this race.
Some of them. I mean,
I think some of them, but I also think some of them might be Becker supporters who are just sort of like, blow the thing up, we don't like the establishment sort of thing. And so I don't know that it's, and I think a lot of them will be Democrats. I think there's lots of behind-the-scenes work being done with Democrats. So I just hate the idea, if Julie doesn't win this thing, that it's Cara's fault. I mean, you could probably spread around the blame a little bit, but I've actually evolved a little bit. I used to think Becker was going to win. I actually think Fedorchak is going to win.
I think so. I think Becker's got. His supporters are very, very loyal. They're very durable. They're going to stick with him, which is why I don't think very many of them are voting for Caramond. I think the people who like Becker really, really like Becker. They're going to stick with their person. I just don't. The problem is he's also alienated so many people.
Right.
I mean, there's one thing I'm really glad. I want there to be a price tag for being an unserious entertainer, holding a position where you're supposed to be serious and you're supposed to be making policy and law that's the best for North Dakota and the best for, well, I guess when he was a lawmaker, the best for North Dakota. When you're in Congress, the best for our whole country as well. I want there to be a price tag for that. And, I think I want to see Rick Becker pay the price for it. I'm tired of that style of politicking. Now, I do have that column coming up saying that Munn should drop out, and I think she should. She's not going to win this primary. And I think the only thing is she could potentially cause Rick Becker to get in, because if it's a really close race between Becker and Fedorchak, and 5% or 4% or 3% of the 10 or so percent that Munn might pull in the primary are Fedorchak supporters, that could be it. I'm not saying it will be, but it could be. And why are we? If you want a more centrist, a more responsible Republican Party, if you want to see less dysfunction in Washington, D.C., then why would you want to take that risk? Why are you rolling that dice?
Yeah, but I mean, if you're Caramond and you're looking at this race and, you're not a big fan of Trump, you're pro-choice, I mean, Julie is different in those cases. And so I would say Caramond has a better chance of winning than Alex Balazs right now. I mean, should Alex Balazs be dropping out as well? And I just want to transition really quickly. I think it's really interesting. I think there's a really good chance that both Bartlett and Balazs, who are sort of the stars coming out of the GOP convention, don't get through June. I mean, I think Balazs has no chance, and I think it's going to be close between Jason Heitkamp and Bartlett on who takes second place.
Behind Baszler and the DPI.
Yeah, and so what does that say about the purpose of the GOP convention if they end up endorsing these two folks? One, who Balazs I think is lucky to get up to 5 or 6 points, and the other one can't even take second place. What's the point of the GOP convention?
I have a draft of that argument written, obviously pending what happens in June. But
right.
I think that I think you're right. I'm also kind of laughing that Heitkamp might get second place because of a lot of voters a lot of Democratic voters. Because, by the way, the DPI race is a nonpartisan race. So it means in June, that race will be on both ballots, whether you request a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot. And so I think there's a lot of people who are going to look at his last name, particularly among Democrats, and say, oh, that must be a relative of Heidi. And he is a distant relative of Heidi, does not share her politics.
Well, yeah, and I don't think Joel or Heidi, there's a big distance between them for sure.
Yes.
But it is, Kirsten has historically done really well with Democrats. And so in that race, it's interesting. Jason Heitkamp, who's far, far out of the mainstream, is sort of pulling in potential progressive votes. Jason
Heitkamp is not a serious candidate, and not for the reasons that we say Rick Becker is an unserious candidate, where he's sort of, try to manufacture, he's trying to score really high in national ratings and everything. Jason Heitkamp's not a serious person because I think when we saw him serve in the state Senate, a lot of times he doesn't know what's going on. Right. There's a famous anecdote about him getting locked in the legislative bathroom at one point, and he couldn't get out. So,
and I'm not locked on the outside or something.
I don't know how that happened, but I have heard this story so many times. I was not there. I did not witness it, but I've heard it from so many times from so many sources. There's got to be a grain of truth. There's got to be.
I've never heard that story.
Under all that smoke. I'm not trying to be mean to Jason Heitkamp, but he is not much like Bartlett, he is not qualified. And I don't really know anything about this Darko guy. But Bartlett and Heitkamp, I have seen them. I've evaluated them. Heitkamp specifically served in the legislature. They are not fit for that office.
Right.
They do not have the qualifications.
I agree 100%. Yeah, it's not going to be surprising coming from me that I want people who actually support public schools to be in charge of public schools.
As do I. I mean, the public schools are mandated in our state constitution. My children go to public schools. I like our public schools. You and I differ.
You have a competent person leading it.
Right, exactly.
Continue to have a competent person leading it.
That's right. And you and I just differ on maybe making some alternative choices available, but that's neither here nor there when it comes to supporting our existing public schools.
Yeah, and again, supporting a competent leader at the top of those.
Yeah. This poll in the governor's race, what do you make of it?
Well, I think I'm sort of where you and Pat are as well. I think the distance between the two candidates is a little bit higher than I had expected. But with that being said, so it's off by 10 points and he's up 30.
Yeah.
Right. Or it's
off by 15 points and he's up 25.
Yeah, it's such a huge margin, and and it is different. It's different than the Burgum campaign. One, it's 3 months later or 2 months later.
The Burgum poll, because when I looked back and it was reported on by the Forum, by Mike Nowatzki, who's now Burgum's spokesman. He was a reporter at the
That's
time.
Crazy. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so Mike Nowatzki wrote the article, but I think the poll itself was actually conducted in late February, if I remember right.
It's more poll.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I should ask you as a North Dakota.
I don't remember when it was put out, but I'll tell you what, our pollster, Dean Mitchell, that one stuck with him. And it was an accurate poll at the time, right? That's the thing.
I think it was accurate. I think Burgum moved the needle. I think Burgum came in and he caught fire. And it was 2016, which was the year of the outsider and everything else. I think that's been Miller's big mistake, is she's running a 2016 campaign in 2024.
Yeah, but I still, from the beginning on this podcast, you and I have been talking about what's her path. Is it to go to the right of him? Does it go to the left? Kelly's like his support is broad within the Republican spectrum, right? I mean, conservatives like him, moderates like him. He walks into a room, people like him. Other than that one dinner at Minot when he got booed or whatever, I can't remember the circumstance.
And that was I reported on that. It was a smattering of boos from one table in the corner.
Right.
So let's not read too much. I mean,
but again,
let's not read too much into it.
Yeah, but those people are, far right. Though I couldn't come up with, I still can't come up with a scenario where sort of the Becker backers start supporting Tammy Miller. Like,
right.
They've always been anti-Burgum.
Either they're just not going to vote in the gubernatorial primary, or they're going to vote for Kelly as at least he's not. I mean, because the thing is, some of them may be ambivalent about Kelly or maybe even dislike him, but man, do they hate Doug Burgum. I mean, that faction of sort of core populist Becker backers really hate Doug Burgum, and Tammy Miller is Doug Burgum's candidate.
And it just feels like the shots that Miller has taken up to this point. Finken referenced a new ad. I don't know if
I have not seen it yet. I don't know what he was talking about.
Neither have I. But it just seems like those hits haven't stuck so far. And I think part of that is, again, Tammy not having sort of a grounding and high name ID when she got into this thing, wasn't able to build up her positives. It became really, really difficult. And again, Kelly's a very difficult candidate to go after.
Because I just don't know what has he done? I mean, I guess there's the same-sex marriage vote, right? Where
does that feel like something Tammy Miller is opposed to? I mean, it feels like such a...
I don't know that Tammy Miller can credibly hit him on that, because everyone's going to look at it as like, you agree with him on that. What are you doing?
He's a CEO of a big company. I mean, in Fargo, I can't imagine, like, she'd be like, nope, traditional marriage only. Just seems like such an outdated, regressive sort of position.
Yeah, I just don't see her. I think it's really hard for her to credibly get to his right because of the existing perceptions of her of being pretty moderate herself, and the fact that she's, her horse and buggy are tied to Doug Burgum. And both Doug Burgum and Tammy Miller have come to Trumpism and populism pretty late. Right. Well, like in terms of full blown, I mean, you have the sort of nominal endorsements for Trump from Burgum that were just sort of, he's our Republican nominee and stuff. There wasn't a whole ton of enthusiasm behind it. And if you go back and look at Doug Burgum's and Tammy Miller's political donation, I shouldn't say Miller so much. I know for a fact that Doug Burgum, up to the April quarterly FEC reports of this year, had never given a dime to a Donald Trump political committee.
Yeah, and I think, saying they came late to the Trumpism is right. I mean, it's not like they were endorsing Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, but they weren't out there sort of clamoring for Donald Trump.
In 2016, Doug Burgum made a donation to a presidential campaign. It was Marco Rubio.
Sure.
I mean, I wasn't, and that was obviously during the primary. He didn't make a donation he didn't like come around and make a donation to Trump during the general. So I mean, it's opportunistic. It's like, oh, we need to win a Republican primary. Let's be as Trump as we can.
So do you think that Burgum's focus on becoming vice president has also sort of limited the amount of time he's thinking about and helping the Miller campaign?
I don't know how else. I made that argument in the column about the polling, and I don't know how else to look at it. We know where he's spending his time. He's on national media all the time. I was just reading a report last night about the amount of time he's spending making calls to raise money for Donald Trump. Trump obviously, he has a big deficit behind Joe Biden and the Democrats. He needs money. He also needs to pay his legal bills. So, you have all that going on. How much more bandwidth does Doug Burgum have to devote to electing Tammy Miller? And then when it also, there's a lot of speculation about whether or not Trump would get into this race. How much political capital does Doug Burgum want to spend on electing Tammy Miller governor when he's got his own agenda?
Well, and not to mention, I mean, Doug Burgum can read a poll, right? And, if these numbers are accurate, I have no reason to believe that they're not, why would Burgum spend a bunch of his capital to come in so Trump moves 20 points and she still loses by 20? Was Burgum at the meeting with Trump where they made the pitch to oil executives the billionaire oil executive is basically saying, raise me $1 billion and I'll remove everything that Biden has done on EVs and oil, all that.
It's so hard because it's hard for me to tell like events apart down there.
Yeah, there's a picture of the two of them, but there was no reference to Burgum in the article.
I don't know if he was there or not.
Yeah. But I do think, and I haven't read the article that talked about how much time he's spending raising money, but I mean, it's a pretty darn good surrogate for Trump. I mean, do you think, Rob, that like if you were a betting man, which you may be, I don't know if you are.
I don't gamble at all. But
does Burgum get this? Do you think it's like he's really seriously being considered?
I think, yes, I think he's absolutely seriously being considered. I think part of the problem is, Donald Trump likes to run these things as the apprentice. So, sometimes it's like we like to build up somebody so that it's all about ratings, right? I mean, it's,
sure.
I mean, that's Donald Trump knows anything else, it's about getting ratings.
Do you think Burgum's peaking too early in this VP race?
It could be, right? I mean, especially, I mean, the one thing the shoe I'm kind of waiting for drop is when some of the other hopefuls for VP start dropping their Oppo research on Doug. And you start seeing
it's not that hard. You look at one Meet the Press article or interview where he talked about he wouldn't do business with the guy.
Right.
Full stop.
Right. And
Trump's not gonna like that.
Some of the vetoes in the legislature where he's vetoing some of the culture war. But now, granted, he also signed some.
Right.
He vetoed some too. I mean, there's some stuff there that people can.
I guarantee you most people are going to focus on the ones he did that they disagree with, not the ones that he did.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm waiting for some of that to start turning up because he's been the golden boy for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for some of that to turn up, when somebody sticks a knife in him because they want the VP more.
I will give Burgum some credit though. You and I have talked about him being on the road quite a bit, but he seems like yesterday at a press conference and he was out in Teddy Roosevelt. How much time is that dude spending on airplanes? Because it's like one night he's with Trump and then the next morning he's doing a press conference here in Bismarck. I mean,
he must have a bedroom on the airplane and he's just sitting there. He's just got an apartment in the airplane and he's just going all over the place. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot, but also, I mean, that was the point I made in the column between obviously the necessaries of continuing to be North Dakota's governor until December and, his agenda that's down in Florida and anywhere else. By the way, the next thing I'm waiting is for Doug Burgum to turn up at Trump's trial back in to show him. I was just reading an article this morning about all the people showing up to show Donald Trump moral support. Senator Rick Scott was there and some others.
Like sitting in the courtroom?
Yep, sitting in the courtroom behind him so that he can, there is somebody like I guess Trump has somebody there whose job it is to like print out nice things that people have written about him and hand them to him for like moral support and things like that. And like, I guess his lawyers argued about how important it was for the jury to see that he had support right behind him. So Trump's put out the call to people to come and sit with him. He had his son Eric in there the day that Stormy Daniels was testifying, I guess. How awkward is that, right? I mean, you want to sit in the courtroom and hear... You want to sit in the courtroom and hear the porn star testify how she slept with your dad? It's a great father-son moment.
Yeah.
But I'm waiting for Burgum to show up there. Like, part of me thinks he's going to show up there.
I just don't get it. I just don't get all of it. I had a friend from DC text me after Burgum was on one of the Sunday shows and just said, "What happened to your governor?
Yeah.
What happened to him?
Yeah,
I like this guy. What happened?"
Careerism. Like it's I mean, I think Doug Burgum wants to set a high watermark for his political career. And maybe that's, and also probably thinks 2028 being a VP or being a cabinet secretary, that might be the best shot. Considering that he's the governor of North Dakota, which is not exactly a strong springboard into national politics.
Yeah, if he becomes VP and Trump wins, or even if Trump loses, it sets him up very. And actually, if Trump loses, it might set him up even better
because then he doesn't have the baggage of the second Trump administration. Like,
yeah, because Pence didn't exactly come out of that administration ready to roll. I don't know, but Sunday morning talk shows are hard to watch these days. I think I told you I made the mistake of watching Kristi Noem. It's like the most painful interview I've ever heard. I mean, And it's not even the dog stuff. It's the making up meetings with foreign leaders stuff that really gets me. And then saying it's not true, and we're editing it, but not really saying it's not true.
Also, like name dropping Kim Jong-un. Okay, he is the dictator of what's called the Hermit Kingdom, because they don't have diplomatic relationships with most of the world. Like any member of the American political leadership meeting with Kim Jong-un, whether it's the mayor of Podunk, Texas, or the governor of South Dakota, or the president of the United States, would make major news, because we don't have diplomatic relationships with North Korea.
Yeah, she's not sneaking into North Korea without people being somewhat aware of it. But yeah, it's just a bizarre world, the way these folks are chasing Trump, and I don't know.
It is very frustrating. But back to the gubernatorial race, I don't think that the final vote on June is going to be that lopsided. I think that Miller's going to tighten it up between now and then, especially if, again, Finken referred to a new ad that's pretty wicked. I mean, I think there's things she can do, but I don't know how you overcome a 40-point with somebody who's, I mean, she's not an outsider anymore, although she likes to portray herself that. She's her office is 20 steps down the hall from the one she wants. She's, basically running as a continuation of the Burgum administration that's been in charge for 8 years. It's not 2016 anymore. And this deficit, this poll shows, is in mid-May. We're 30 days out, or 30 plus a couple days out from primary day.
So, Rob, why do you think it tightens? I mean, I think it, just because the poll is just 40 is such a big number, but part of me, it's like, she spent millions of dollars. If she hasn't tightened it by now, like, what would change in the next month? I mean, Pat referenced it's a long election, or a long time before the election, but not move 40 points or even 20 points at this point when you're running, it's a known commodity who's spending dollar for dollar with you. I don't know. I think it might end up being, a 65-35 race.
When I say tighten, I'm saying it might be.
It's a 20.
It's only like a 25-point win, not a 40-point win. I don't think she's going to get close.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that, I mean, maybe we'll both be wrong and they'll be waving another polling was all wrong again. The thing is, like the position that we're in is, we're constantly trying to grab any crumb of information or data that we can and extrapolate from it. But at the end of the day, there's a reason we hold the votes.
Right.
So I don't want to say that Miller can't win, but boy, I just don't.
I think since the beginning of the race, the path for her was very, very narrow. And I think it's just continued to narrow as the years gone along. I think it's difficult. And I also think, she's not a perfect political candidate, but she's a very, very impressive person. And so what happens after this? I mean, if she does lose this thing, I just hope they don't burn the whole place down and leave her, holding the bag with a 40-point loss.
Yeah. Part of me wonders too, like, if you're Tammy Miller, how much more do you want to invest in making the likely next governor upset at you if you want to continue to have a career in North Dakota politics, if you want to take another shot? I mean, if you're going to get very, very personal with them, and listen, I mean, Kelly's a professional. We all know what campaigns are, and people can move on from them. But I mean, if it gets very personal, like if it gets very ugly, how ugly do you want to get and burn a bridge?
Well, but I think the other thing, it's not just the candidate, it's the people around the candidate who won't forget, that's burning a bunch of bridges. I will tell you, as the spouse of a candidate, the state legislative, much smaller, Aaron forgave a bunch of people who went after her. I will never forget them. So I think Kelly's surrounded by a bunch of people who, even if Kelly's a professional and says, it's just a campaign, there's going to be some grudges held from a lot of people versus Miller and her campaign team. I think Dawson is an exceptionally bright guy and pretty darn good at this. He's made some people mad with some of his comments.
It's Dawson Schefter, the spokesman for the Miller campaign, and I think he's the campaign manager.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I think that's. I sometimes get their titles wrong. Anyway, well, that's it. That's going to be a very interesting race, and I think back to the House race. I really think ultimately it's on Fedorchak. I think if she executes in the next 3-4 weeks, she wins.
Right.
But she's got to execute.
And the other hard thing is who votes, right? We've talked a lot about 2016, 114,000 people voted in that GOP primary. That's not many votes. It's like a state Senate race in an urban, like a bigger state. And so who votes in that thing? Like, who are people motivated? Who's doing programs? I think Finken sort of alluded to they're going to be doing some turnout programs, which I think is smart. So we'll see.
Yeah.
The congress race is going to be close.
It is. I agree with that. All right. We're going to stop it there. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah.
Can I have one other thing?
You sure can.
The last podcast we did, I wished my wife a happy anniversary.
Yeah.
And quizzed her and tested her if she listened. I learned she does listen to the podcast.
You texted me about 20 minutes after it went up. She'd already heard it.
Well, but I found out somebody listened to it and texted her and said, happy anniversary. You should really listen to Chad's podcast today. Chad Rob's podcast. So she just tipped off.
She cheated.
Cheater. All
right. Well, I guess we'll have to have her on sometime to explore that. I think
we should explore her work with rural development more than if she listens to
maybe, but I feel like, especially when we get into next year, which is an off-political year, and we're into the doldrums that we don't, I think having Erin on to talk about, of course, her work as a rural development director, but also explore some of the nuances of your marriage. I think that would be a good topic.
The nuances of our marriage. I kind of like Erin and I coming on and just sort of chatting with you, really, just to have somebody to talk to.
There we go. Yeah. About who's leaving their underwear on the floor, who's not putting the seat down, things like that. I think our audience
and the listeners will love it.
The 3 people who are still hanging on at this point in the podcast are eagerly awaiting that.